Hello, everybody. My name is Daniel Carpenter again. I'm actually not leading this discussion this time. It will be Amy leading the discussion. She will be joining us momentarily along with Nadia again. And there we are. Hello.
Hey.
I had to solo a bit by introducing you as the lead discussion person. So take it away, Amy.
Okay. Is Naria on yet, or?
She'll be on in just a few minutes.
Okay. Okay. So pretty much a lot of this was around the movie and a couple of the articles.
Hang on, I think you're breaking up. Okay, I can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. So a lot of this was about swarm intelligence and focused around the movie and the couple of articles and competency in general of the command leaders. So basically I guess we'll just start getting into the questions. The first question is looking at figure 3.2, and Flynn and Arbuthnot discuss what heedfulness is and explain how expert commanders with high expertise can fail when their level of heedfulness is low. Do you think heedfulness in command decision making can mitigate events with high complexity and intractability? How or how not? That's a complicated question.
Yes. Well, hang on. I just got a notification from Nadia that she's having some trouble getting on here.
Oh.
But I just resent her the invite. I don't know what happened the first time, but I've just sent her another invite.
Okay.
She said that she wasn't able to join the call yet. So in the meantime, let me explain to you how to set this up. So what you do is you go to. She has a little PowerPoint underneath the introductory part.
Yeah, I've followed the PowerPoint a few times, but for some reason my YouTube has some blocked access that won't allow me to do this. So I've gotten 5 different people to look at it, and for some reason my YouTube account will not, or what I have of a YouTube account will not let me set it up. So I mean,
are you not able to open up another channel? Because there should be a way to.
I don't YouTube. So in terms of opening up channels, I don't do that. I literally created a YouTube account for this project. So I wouldn't know how to open up a YouTube channel.
Well, this is my channel, although these were the first videos I've actually done. But like I said, I was getting some help from people I know that actually do this a lot more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the ones giving me some advices to that sort of information.
Yeah.
Is she just going to go ahead and refresh the browser?
Okay.
So she isn't able to get on yet because she went smoothly last time. The second go around went smoothly.
Yeah, I mean, maybe worst case we can restart it and see if she can join.
Yeah, that might be what I end up doing if she says she can't do it, because we don't need her for more than 15 minutes anyway.
No, we need her for the whole thing. It's a discussion, so we need her for the whole thing. So she's got to participate in us talking about all the answers.
Oh, there she is.
Hey,
hi. I had to get on my phone because my laptop wasn't working.
Oh.
Well, you're on, so let's go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and do the take 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're looking at question number 1, which is about expert commanders with high expertise and how they can fail when their level of heedfulness is low.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna start by defining heedfulness and talking about whether we think heedfulness and command decision making can mitigate events with high complexity and intractability. How or how not.
Mm-hmm.
So nice and simple.
Yes.
So what I would say is leaders need to be able to understand each other, and because when I was watching the video, it seemed to me that the leaders were butting heads. The fire brigade were completely left out of the discussion or out of any input. And I was doing a lot of FEMA stuff because I was trying to take care of those FEMA things as quickly as possible, so I have less to do head up to the Northeast. One of the things I was talking about was the leadership aspect, which the leaders need to be willing to discuss things with people and be open with everybody. Will there be mistakes? Sure. But the important thing is that these leaders of these people like the FBI leadership, or in the case of the London Fire Brigade, the mayor, the fire brigade chief, the police chief, and my six, they all need to be able to understand each other's concerns and plan a response around that.
Okay. You're breaking up just a little bit for me, Rusty, so I'm only catching
Me too.
most of what you're saying. So I apologize if I missed.
Can you hear me better now?
No, no.
How about I do this? Can you hear me better now?
Is it the same for you, Mario?
Yeah, it's breaking up on my end too.
Okay, because I can see you clearly. I just can't see Daniel clearly.
Can you not see me?
Yeah, you're going in and out completely of even the picture.
Well, that's strange because I can definitely see you guys. I can hear you guys.
Okay. Well, I mean, I can catch most of what you're saying. I just, if I misconstrue something you said, some stuff I'm kind of guessing, filling in some words. That's it.
Okay, let me try and say it one more time.
Okay.
So what I was saying was, I was doing several FEMA assignments because I'm trying to get those done quickly. And one of the things I was talking about was leadership. So, are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, I can keep going now.
Okay, so one of the things I was talking about was the fact that leaders need to be able to work together and understand each other's points of view. And when I was watching the video, they didn't do that. They were talking about what some people needed, but they completely left out the fire brigade of any of that discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And so in order to heed each other's concerns, they need to listen first, because a good leader listens.
Mm-hmm.
They don't just say, you do this, you do that. They need to be able to understand what the other person's concern is, and from that point, construct a better system. For example, if they say the suits are too heavy, it's going to kill us in this, then maybe you try and construct better. Maybe you try and engineer a better suit that still do the same job, but it's lighter. And then you do the drill to just make sure that so that when the real thing happens, everything's good, everything's ready, and there's not going to be an issue.
Right. Do you have anything you want to add, or?
I mean, I agree with what you're saying. I think how you said a good leader needs to listen as well. I feel like you can only give out so much, but how I was saying early in my blog post, how community involvement is so important. You also need to listen to what others are telling you, even as a leader, because maybe the community knows the city better and can help you with things that you don't know yourself, so you can implement it as a leader, implement it into your plans.
I think that's a valid point because, I mean, for example, the President of the United States can't possibly know from Washington, D.C. everything that's going on if, God forbid, an earthquake hits California. He actually knows every detail about that. He needs to know from the people on the ground there, including civilians, what the problem is. In fact, the only way that those leaders will know is from the lowest of these civilians that is affected the worst. So they have to be able to listen to what they're saying more than all people, I would say, because if you have people in the worst situation, they got hit the worst. They need the most help, so they are in the best position to tell you what happened and how better prepare for something that large.
Right.
Yeah, I think, the word, it speaks to the human aspect of things, and it's about the overall picture and how one thing affects the other. So definitely, both of your points on being able to listen, to prepare and things like that, definitely speak to heedfulness and its importance. Especially when things become complex. I think it would be really important when it's complex. Does anybody have anything else about that one before we move on to the next question?
I look at it a bit like this aspect.
Mm-hmm.
So look at it a bit like a pilot in a plane. And I would say, from what I understand, about half the plane crashes are a result of human error in the cockpit. And so, similarly, in a disaster, particularly a terrorist attack, that depends on the human element. And I think, because, for example, if we look at the Japanese versus the United States responses to disasters, I think we can say that the Japanese have engineered things better than we have for earthquakes. Not that we've yet been tested to the level that they have in our civilized society. But I think the fact that they've had that much practice means that their pilots, if you will, are better able to navigate around those difficult waters compared to us and say hurricanes and such, where we're not the best. We don't have the best technology of that compared to what they would have, because they too face hurricanes.
Right. And I think, like, in the book, it gave a really good example of it, of the Waco incident, and how, basically you can have all the logistics and tactical experience in the world, as the ATF does, obviously. But in the instance of this case, they, failed in the heedfulness aspect of it. And they didn't acknowledge, David Koresh has a vast following, and they were willing to die for their beliefs and to be able to be left alone. Plus, they ignored previous events where those things, it came into play before, where the same questioning by the government came into play, and it led to violence and death in those cases as well. So in that case, for local stuff, in that case, the Waco incident's a really good example of how heedfulness can definitely help or hurt in mitigating events.
I would go one step farther, and I would look at 9/11, because that's another one where you could say the people that carried out the attacks were not completely unknown.
Right.
But there was a complete, utter failure of the communication between the federal government and the state level governments and locals, who are constantly butting heads with each other, despite saying, "Hey, this guy's taking off with planes, but he's not interested in landing them. He just wants to know how to take them off. This guy here is just came over. We don't know why he's here, but he's acting erratically." Yet, or even the Florida shooting, you had a guy there that twice he had the FBI contacted about him, and twice they did not heed the warnings.
Yeah, and that's actually going to be a good segue into our next question, regarding the critical competencies and what's required of successful incident commanders handling the complex crises. Discuss each of these competencies using, whenever possible, examples of operational commanders, both fire and law enforcement, featured in the film The Dirty War. So the first competency listed is the handling multiple demanding problems concurrently under conditions of high stress, emotion, urgency, confusion, and uncertainty. So typical situation in any crisis, but in the Dirty War, for me, what stood out was the secondary fires that kept popping up. They were unable to handle things at ground zero, because obviously they couldn't reach it. So secondary fires began, and then the situation went from bad to worse. So that one was mine. I'll move on to the second one, and we can kind of each jump in on some of them.
Okay.
Ranking different competing tasks in order of importance in compressed time frames with limited resources. Either y'all want to jump in on that one?
You want to do it? Or
Well, I'm going to slightly deviate from the video by talking about the fact that, by again, referring back to 9/11 in the sense that you could argue that because there were several things that they had to do to try and save however many people they could save after the attack had happened. I mean, you had to try and evacuate people, and it depended on the building too. You had to try and get people out of two very tall towers. You had to try and put out as many of the fires as you could before that thing collapsed, which it ended up doing. You also had to try and get these people, once they're out of the building, away from where it could possibly fall, depending on how. So you basically had to figure out where this thing hit, how hard, like at what trajectory, and the time frame that you have to get people out of there before that thing collapses. And then you look at the Pentagon. You have to again determine the speed that was going. So you look at all these different tasks that they had to accomplish, both mathematically, and other such things, to be able to make an accurate assessment as to how to create a plan of action, and on the fly too.
Sure.
Right. And then the what it says is in order of importance in compressed time frames. So like you were saying, they had to do all those things with X amount of time. Like they didn't know how long it would take until the buildings collapse. But I think that's something that should take into consideration if an attack ever happened again, that you have all these different tasks. You have to serve for the people first. So it's just something on their end that has to be communicated with the federal government, with the local government, even with the people inside the building.
Right.
And again, and I'll also go ahead and go back to the Florida shooter, like we were talking about earlier, because the tasks there were, first of all, the FBI had to tell the local guys, especially on the second one, the Miami branch, had to tell the police in that area, hey, watch out, we've gotten another tip about this guy. And by the way, you guys have been pulling up this house about 50 times over the last several years. You may want to try and get this guy some mental health. But once that attack happened, they needed the school security guard to come back to them and to basically not engage the guy, but at least tell them where this guy is, what's going on, because there's no way that guy should have been able to get in there, get out of there, and then be apprehended in an entirely different county. I mean, that's a complete failure. And it's the fact that all these tasks that we're talking about here, they were completely, ranking these different competing tasks in order. I mean, none of those, you can't rank them if you don't use them.
Okay. Yeah. And in the interest of time, I'm gonna keep kind of moving on just a little bit, just because we got a lot to get through, and this is a long answer to this question. Knowing and executing predefined options for handling certain types of crises and their impacts. So how would y'all relate that to the video?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. Can you say that again, please?
The third critical competency is knowing and executing predefined options for handling certain type of crises and their impacts.
So I would relate that to the video by saying the fact that, again, it goes back to the fact that they didn't do a good enough job of finding out from each other what they need, what the problems are, because they had an idea that a dirty weapon might happen. They had been training for that in the event it would happen, but the mayor was constantly told, we are not ready for this. We have certain things that we need to do. Yet she ignored those warnings. The fire brigade were saying we don't have the protective gear that's comfortable enough to be able to rescue these people. I mean, it looked like but the government frankly looked like a complete joke because they weren't able to do anything.
Right.
Like, nothing at all.
It was interesting to see them as they practiced their rescue plans and rehearsed their rescue plans, and then we couldn't do something as basic as reaching ground zero, which is totally against everything they were practicing, or not in conjunction with what they were practicing. So we'll move on to the next competency: formulating new courses of action to resolve or mitigate novel crises and their impacts.
Okay, so so formulating new courses of actions to resolve. So like on the scene, it's kind of like, what can you do to fix the situation? So like you have, I believe they're hot zones. You have different you have one hot zone. So it should be like, what are your next steps in order to, like, let's say there's a spill on the highway. You have a hot zone formed on the side in the service road. So what are you going to do to evacuate? What are you going to do to save all the people who are actually on the highway? It's different levels that you have to obtain and to think about for the whole scenario.
Yeah, that's a good point. The next competency is coordinating the activities of numerous specialists, each having to some extent conflicting decision premises, mental models, and views about needed courses of sections, and a vested interest in seeing their model implemented. So we saw that a lot with what Daniel was talking about with the minister when she was trying to get things set up in the beginning and being told, certain things she wanted to have happen weren't going to happen. And we saw it with the fire chief when he was refusing to follow evacuation orders and things like that. Do you guys have anything to add on that one?
Well, it's not in the video, but it's kind of relates to the video. How last semester I was in an active shooter exercise. And so my group's role was to coordinate with all the leaders of Sam Houston's campus, such as the dean of students, the leader over the campus dorms, the chief of police. And so basically we're in a room with all of them, and we just had to break out a scenario in the event if there was an active shooter. So it kind of lets each important department know each other's plans. So when you do get to a scene like the fire chief not following evacuation orders, you would already know what's expected.
Right.
Instead of being on the scene and then not, and arguing on the scene, which causes for more problems.
Right. That's really interesting. So y'all were just discussing the planning, or did you actually do a drill? Or
we did a drill.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's super.
Yes.
Next competency, just to get through this question, because there's a lot of them. Conducting accurate situation assessments and ordering actions that will result in major social and economic dislocations. For me, what stood out for me was the scene where the fire captain established that there was a potential for radiation, and then actually followed through and radioed it in. Because he was the person on the scene and could get that in, so they can start working on the potential for radiological materials and things of that nature, which help their planning. Anybody else? Move on. Okay. Making high-risk decision with life and death outcomes.
So, again, deviating slightly from the video, deviating slightly from the video, I would again look at September 11th. And what they were doing, what the firefighters were doing, especially in the World Trade Center, was they were risking their lives to go up to the highest levels and trying to get as many people down in, as we stated, not a lot of time, or an unknown quantity of time. And so I'd say that's a high risk situation, because you're risking manpower knowing that there's a good chance not a lot of them are going to be coming down alive. But the risk is, if it's successful, you're going to save a lot of lives, or at least mitigate the situation in such a way that you can at least get as many survivors out as possible.
Yeah. Well, and I know that they had the information about, they were suspecting the buildings were going to fall, but the fire department radios didn't work properly. So that's why there were so many firefighters lost. They couldn't get that information to them. So
Right.
I don't know that they intentionally knew they were up against the building falling, but yeah, definitely.
I mean, even if you have good communication, which of course they didn't, and that's something that they of course had to fix.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you don't count that, they still knew it was. You still know when that thing's going to come down, and you don't know. Like, there's still a lot of unknowns, even if you do have the communication.
Other planes, yeah.
It's like the guys on the ground had no idea. Hey, you better get over to the World Trade Center. There's 2 planes about to crash into it.
Well, and secondary attacks are a big deal too. So, yeah, definitely a good point. Okay, let's see. Activating
sprained materials and the response they could do, because I mean, you're already sending a lot of people up into one tower. Now you have the second one getting hit. So now you gotta move resources over to that one. So you gotta communicate, hey, we need you over to that one. That one just got hit. Then you got more people just flooding in there, trying to get as many people out of there.
Sure.
It's like, and you don't know when the next one's gonna hit, because throughout all the mayhem, you don't know. Like, you're not in communication with the air traffic control. You don't know how many planes are still in the air and about to crash into another building. Like, how do you know the Empire State Building wasn't going to get hit next?
Sure.
I mean, just all down the skyline, it's like there's a ton of skyscrapers. You have no idea how, like, am I going to be moved from here to another one because another one just got hit? And we knew, of course, after the fact there was just 4, one of which crashed in the ground, into the fields of Pennsylvania. But again, at that time, you don't know how many are out.
Sure. The next competency is activating an appropriate level of organizational response to handle the crisis, yet maintaining normal operations at the highest level feasible. Anybody on that one? For me, it was the fact that they didn't allow emergency personnel to enter the zone. That was real. That was real big for me in terms of relating it to that one, because that would have been the normal operation. Obviously, emergency personnel are gonna want to and need to be on the scene, and they weren't allowed to pass a certain point.
Yeah, it's their job to get in there and at least mitigate the situation as best as they can.
Right, and I feel like that all falls on communication. Just like what he was saying with 9/11, like, I mean, like, it wasn't intentional, but communication failed, which resulted in some deaths.
Yeah. All right, and we've got 2 more, so let's try to get through these quick, and then we can move on to a new question. Coordinating actions and negotiating agreements across organizational and disciplinary boundaries.
Yes. So, like, with the military, there's different branches, different commanders. So just mobilizing them as a unit and like you said, coordinating actions across, because it's a huge not an organization, but it's a huge branch. It's a huge branch. You have different branches. So depending on the disaster or hazard, you have to send, either you're sending the Navy or sending Navy SEALs out to different locations to handle what they can do with their duties.
Yeah. And it's funny because watching them, they were literally arguing. They needed more personnel, but some of them didn't want to mobilize the military, and it's like, why wouldn't you utilize those bodies, basically? But anyway, okay, last one: managing personal stress levels to prevent or minimize performance degradation. So that's huge in any incident, because no matter how much you compartmentalize stuff, that's going to be stressful to deal with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you look at all these different disasters that have happened over the years. I mean, it's it's easy to say it's going to go smoothly when the time comes, even after all that training and all that practice.
Mhm.
But until the situation actually hits, you have no idea how exactly it's going to go.
Right.
I mean, sure, no two school shootings and those two school shootings have been exactly the same.
Mhm.
And so, but even then, despite the fact of all that, it still doesn't get any easier. Like, even if they were all the same, it still doesn't get easier trying to realize that there's already people dead
Mhm.
that you couldn't get to.
Right.
It's like you're doing everything you can, but at the same time, you have to realize, you know what? I'm doing my best, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's just going to happen that way.
Yeah. And I mean, it was telling to see the fire chief, like one of his real motivations for going in there and defying all the orders was he didn't know where his wife was. And it all came down to personal for him because he
And
wanted his wife.
sometimes you have to do with. I mean, in the case of the fire chief, it's like you have to go. It's like you have to go in there. I mean, they can say all you want. Hey, you can't go in there. But at some points, you gotta say, look, that's my family in there. I gotta do what's best.
Right.
If I don't
You
come
have to
out
put your
there, so
priorities
be it.
first.
If I don't come out there, so be it. But I'm going there. I'm going in there to try and save them if I can. If I die, I'll at least be with them.
Right.
And like, law enforcement too, if it's not if it's not my wife or my husband, then it's someone else's. So it's another motivation to go in there because
Mhm.
somebody else's kid and it's somebody else's mom. So it gives you more reason to run towards instead of against, but it makes it harder for you to control what you need to control to get through it.
Right.
Okay, if you guys are good on question 2, we're gonna move on.
Yeah.
The third question is, when speaking of command experience, Flynn and Arbuthnot advocated that the degree of correlation between a commander's competence and the time served is not great. Using Harold and Jefferson in Figure 1, explain what factors beyond experience allow commanders to remain effective when dealing with uncertainty.
Well, the first one I would look for, and I actually was reading this, is situational awareness. You got to be aware of the situations that are happening, because if you don't know if you don't know the situations, how can you make an effective response or do anything that we've talked about between emergency management 1 and 2? You got to
Right.
be able to be aware of your situation and your surroundings. So I mean, I would say that's actually the most important part about this is because like I said, you have to know what's going on. You have to. I mean, it's you have to know.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with you. I think knowledge is so important. And even with reading the readings and all the articles, most of them are talking about how are giving advice that educate yourself first before
Mm-hmm.
you ever put in a situation with a disaster. Knowledge is so important. And like I feel like if you know what you're doing or if you're prepared or even know what to do to recover, that's going to be beneficial to yourself and to your community. But most people aren't educated when it comes to that emergency management. So it makes it difficult.
Right. For example, whenever you think about like an active shooting situation in a school, usually what they do is they hit the fire alarm. The problem is when you do that, people's first instinct after all those fire drills is go into the hallway and try and get out the fastest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is that's where the shooter wants you to go. In fact, they usually are the ones pulling that handle and say, "Hey, it's a fire! Come on out! I'll get you guys out of here."
Mm-hmm.
When there should be a second alarm to say, "Okay, this is the active shooter alarm. You hear this button?
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you do."
Right.
That way, people get into the mindset of knowing, okay, here's the situation. The alarm's going off for the active shooter.
Mm-hmm.
How do we? And so now we know we need to either crouch down and stay locked in, or
Mm-hmm.
break the window and get out that way. If
Right.
the classroom has a window.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think like kind of just to sum it up, what Naria was saying, like especially like with the data and knowledge that comes with stuff, you have to balance it out with the experience and judgment and the history that you have on your own to be able to get ultimately what you're looking for as the commander is comprehension of the situation and what action you need to take. And those things are definitely important in and of themselves, and they're not the same thing. Experience and competence are not the same thing.
Right, and that's part of the reason that's part of the reason that you have briefings is that when a new guy gets to the scene that's an emergency management guy, he doesn't know exactly what he's been hearing a lot on the radio, but it's a lot of commotion and chaos. So when he gets there, he needs somebody to be able to brief him to say, "Hey, here's the situation. Here's what we need you to do." That's part of situational awareness. Like, here's the problem. Here's what we need you to do.
Right. Okay.
And then once you understand the briefing, once you're told, "Hey, here's what we need to do," guess what? You're gonna do that because that's my job. I need to do that job.
Right. Okay. Let's go on to question number 4. Based on Stevenson and Bonobo, define the concept of swarm intelligence to include its characteristics and explain how its elements are relevant to emergency management. So swarm mentality, if you think of, like, to me, I immediately thought of bees or wasp. Like they attack as one. They see an issue and then they get it all at the same time. So swarm intelligence is basically, to me, just a collection of people being able to think together, as opposed to one individual standing out and saying, "I don't want to hear it. This is my decision."
And see, that comes with planning and proper preparation. Because if you're going to be able to do that swarm effectively, you have to know what you're going to be doing. You have to know after a lot of practice that everything's going to work great. All the systems are good. All the equipment works properly. Once you know all of that, then you can effectively be able to do the swarm because I'm protected from radiation. It's not too heavy. It's maybe not comfortable, but it's bearable. It's like it's not going to be something that makes it even more difficult to be able to carry out rescue efforts because I know it works. I'm at the peace of mind knowing this is going to be fine. I'm not going to worry about this. I just need to do my job.
Right. And the authors mentioned how the 3 characteristics of swarm intelligence are for managing emergency management are flexibility, is it robustness? And self-organization. And then they mentioned how this was missing from the response to Katrina, which is true. When you think of all those characteristics, how there really wasn't unity. Emergency management wasn't as strong as it should be. Self-organization, that goes with knowledge. Most people didn't know what to do. I mean, a hurricane, as was it category 5? Yeah.
3. It was a 3 when it made landfall in New Orleans.
3? 3, yeah.
When it made landfall in New Orleans.
Oh, okay, yeah. And most people didn't know, like, their city is flooding, like, what can they do? So I think Katrina and 9/11 9/11 actually did have swarm intelligence, but
Katrina I put especially as worse because, I mean, you knew after Florida what this thing was capable of. I mean, you knew that this thing was going to be able to bring a lot of storm surge. FEMA had to know, okay, this is what it did to Florida. We know somewhere on the Gulf Coast it's going to make landfall, and when it does, it's going to be a very bad situation. And so FEMA should have been on their way down there, ready to go once the hurricane, especially once it became clear where that thing was heading, because they knew a couple days in advance that might very well hit New Orleans. Like, it wasn't certain, but there was a good chance that this thing's hitting New Orleans, and when it does, you know what New Orleans is. It's below sea level. You want a storm that can create that much storm surge coming out of a city like that. You're gonna lose a lot of lives. And then the local guys, again, they had to know if this thing starts to turn toward us, or even looks like it's going to, we need to get people out of here. We need to get at least, even if it's a voluntary, just say voluntary evacuation, but the disabled, like the people with special needs, you have to get those guys out first.
Right.
Like as soon as possible. Like, I don't care where you send them, just get them out of there first, because they're not going to be able to get out of there very easily.
Mm-hmm.
Because when I was reading the book, and it's talking about how you have a lot of elderly people and people in hospitals. They're just stranded there for the duration of the hurricane. It's like, what are you doing? That's not good emergency management. That's how you get people killed. It's medical malpractice right there.
Right. And that's the definite common goal or common mission. Evacuation is something that all the agencies and all the commanders could have worked together to do in Katrina, for sure.
Yeah, and you have a problem when the Canadians and the Japanese all the way over in Asia are faster responding to that than you are, and you're the federal government and the state government, and shall I continue? Because you guys may have seen my thread and some of the stuff I was commenting on blogs. The Canadians got that down there very quickly. The Japanese started doing their donations and such within about 24 hours after the incident. It's like they knew, okay, our allies in trouble. Here's what we're going to do.
Mm-hmm. It's like the Coast Guard had a really good response.
And FEMA's puddling around, not knowing what they're doing for like 3 days after the storm. Mm-hmm. Communications again are so bad that George W. Bush is looking like a complete idiot because he has no idea what's going on because FEMA's not getting the information to him.
Right, and in that the Coast Guard stood out as responding really well too, because they ended up just kind of not waiting for people to make decisions, because that was the problem, is there were too many cooks in the kitchen and no one was making a decision. So the Coast Guard actually went out and started rescuing pretty quickly, mostly because they didn't get caught up in having to worry about deference of their responsibility and authority, and they acted on their generosity of spirit and action, is the way I look at that one.
Yeah, and then you look at Hurricane Sandy, again, credit to the place I'm going to be going next Friday. Mm-hmm. The response and the preparation, albeit probably because of Katrina, was much better. There's better communication. In fact, during that, I may actually do a special video where I talk about different things that happened. Mm-hmm. In fact, I might, if things go well, I may even try and talk to one of the police officers up there. I don't know who it will be, but I'll just ask around and see. I can't guarantee I'll do it, but if I can, I'll give you guys a chance to hear from a police officer there for my last video what he saw, what he or she saw, whoever it is, or maybe a fire guy. I'll just have to see when I get up there. But I'm hoping that I'm going to be able to talk to one of them and see what their response was.
Yeah, and I think in Sandy and Katrina, a big difference is Katrina, the government, the main point people, they were really focused on blaming everyone else. I mean, Bush was one, but they basically were saying it's federal government's responsibility. No, it's the local governments. It's the federal. It's the local. They were really caught up in blaming. Mm-hmm. Whereas what Christie did, right, he learned from that experience and how the governor in Louisiana got crucified after her inaction, and he decided, I'm not going to worry about grabbing credit or laying blame. I'm just gonna take action. We're gonna mandate that action's taken.
Right. So. And like I said, and what I'm looking forward to is giving you guys a chance, at least to see. I'm gonna try and turn the computer around when I'm up there, just so you guys can see what the boardwalk and what the pier looks like now, compared to the pictures that you guys saw then. Because I think you're gonna be very impressed by what you see. I mean,
cool. Looking forward to it.
It's really quick how it looked, how they turned that place around. But I'll say
well, cool. And just for time, just because we're kind of running low on time, let's go on to number 5 so we can make sure we hit all 6. You
there?
I lost her too.
Amy.
Okay, there she goes.
Okay. Oh.
Anyway, based on Marcus McNulty, Dorn, and however you say that last name, what defeats swarm intelligence, and what examples from?
Do we want to talk about 5 or?
Oh, do you think the command? Oh, yeah, we could talk
I think
about
we
that.
should.
Yeah. Did I cut out? I'm sorry. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
where we are.
cutting
We're on
out.
5.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Anybody have any thoughts on command and control and swarm intelligence being mutually exclusive?
I mean, I don't think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna, my notes on it are just that, the command decision, it to me it was different because among the actual head leaders, the actual head guys, I found maybe a swarm mentality was the way to go. But when it came to the general population, it could actually, although everybody wants the same thing, a return to safe conditions, it can kind of complicate things a little bit more to have that swarm mentality. Just because planning and organization become a little bit more complicated when you aren't
And
working.
additionally, you don't want just some Joe Schmo just running in there, not knowing what he's doing, putting himself in danger when he doesn't know what he's doing, trying to get into a big building, trying to get his family out. When he doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't have the equipment necessary to get in there, get out quickly with those people. So you don't want people doing that. It's great that they want to take care of people, but you don't want them just storm rushing that place and create more problems for you that's needed. It's like, hey, stay back. We'll take care of this. But you want the emergency people to have that swarm mentality, but you don't want these other people having that mentality because otherwise you're just risking more life than is necessary.
Yeah, for that one, I see, in the rogue aspect of it, I see swarm mentality or swarm intelligence and command and control being two completely different things. I see them being mutually exclusive.
Yes,
but because it's more about action and not as much about planning. So it's more about, look, let's work together to get the, let's get to, or get these people fed or get these hospitals evacuated. It's a common goal that's a little bit smaller. Whereas in the command and control, it's more,
because the planning should have been done. The planning should have been done before that situation happened, so that when you arrive on the scene, you only need a small briefing before you know. Okay, here's the briefing. Let's go in here. We've already had this plan. Can plans change? Sure, but typically it's like, okay, we've planned for this. We've trained for this. We want it to happen, but here's the situation. Let's go do it. Let's go do our job.
Yeah, and that's like in the video where, they did plan for it. They did the rehearsal, they did everything, but when it came down to it, they couldn't get anywhere near where they needed to go. They couldn't put out the fires, they couldn't address the casualties, they couldn't do anything because, oh wait, we never factored in this would be radiological. So, now nothing that we rehearsed is the way it's going to be.
Well, that's why what you do is you plan and prepare for the worst and hope that the best thing happens. That's why they're talking about, okay, it's a terrorist attack, but you prepare for the radiation aspect too. It's like, we hope it never reaches that level, but if it does, here's how we're going to respond to that. That was like, if it's not one of those, okay, we can pull back, we can scale back a little bit, but we'll have everything covered that we can think of.
Right, and I think in their rehearsal, the assumption was that everyone had the proper equipment to be able to address that. They did when they did it, it was a radiological rehearsal, I guess, but everyone had this equipment that worked properly the way it was supposed to.
Yeah, so half of them couldn't even carry it because it's so heavy, and half of it was ripping when they're even doing the preparation, so it's not going to work against radiation.
Yeah.
I agree.
So the equipment has to be perfect for the response to radiation to work, and it wasn't perfect, and you saw what happened.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? And if not, we'll move on to 6 and wrap it all up. That way we've covered everything.
We don't have a 6, do we?
Yeah, that's based on Marcus, McNulty, Dorn, and Galernick. What defeats swarm intelligence, and what examples from the film can you support for their observations? Can you find to support their observations?
Yeah, I think that's what we just did, but sure, we can.
Yeah, we brought it to the movie for sure in our discussion. So.
Yeah, more than that too.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically, the main thing that we didn't cover was what defeats it, and
Right.
competitiveness, ego-driven behavior, and selfish credit taking was what I got out of the readings.
Yeah, and I got similar to that from those FEMA things I was doing. Was again, you don't want people having too much of an ego. You want people to just say, "Look, we win together or we lose together. Nobody's better than the other person.
Right.
We're all in this together. In fact, we lose somebody. It's not it's like how do I say this? We're all in this. Like I said, we're all in this together. I was saying it more simply there. It's like just we're here together. We don't leave till the job's done.
Mm-hmm. And with the well, like the readings in the movie, you have all these different services such as emergency, federal government, local government, even community resources. And if they're not on the same page as planning, or how the author was saying, the lack of I can't say that word. Lack of military among leaders, that's a problem. That's a problem.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
Yep. So, okay, guys, we're right at about 45 minutes. So, unless you guys want to have anything, sum it up.
I'm just going to go one step further. So, if I may reiterate a little bit more about Sandy, what makes that storm interesting is the fact that storms that heavy don't normally hit the Northeast. Like, let's face it, the Gulf Coast. There's been a lot of hurricanes that size in the Gulf Coast. I mean, Hurricane Andrew did almost that exact same thing about 12 or 13 years before Katrina. It's not like Katrina. Again, it's not like Katrina was completely unknown. It's like you knew that was possible in that area. You look at the Northeast. By the time you get up to around like Maryland, the water's not exactly as warm as the Gulf. So, and of course, hurricanes need warm water to thrive. The fact that you had a hurricane come that way that was that big, it's like the fact that the Northeast did as well as they did to mitigate that disaster, considering the fact that New Jersey hadn't been hit dead on like that in over 100 years, that says all you need to know about is you don't need all that much experience dealing with it. What you need is a plan for if this happens. What do you do? Because I mean, New Orleans, like I said, the guys in the Gulf Coast, they knew that was possible. They obviously didn't plan well enough to cover that. I mean, granted, hurricane it helped the Gulf Coast when Hurricane Ike came around because the response was better.
Right.
But like I said, in that area, that's prone to storms. I mean, yeah, these storms coming in from Florida. In fact, typically when they're coming in from Florida, there's a good chance that's coming right for the Gulf Coast somewhere. So let's get a plan. So you should know right then there. Okay, it's coming for us. Here's what we're gonna do.
Right, and I think
what?
With the how you were saying, like with the lack of planning with the hurricanes previous, like now if we have a hurricane either in 2019 or years later on, I feel like local leaders should take what they saw from Katrina, what they saw from Sandy, Ike, and take that into consideration to plan better for the next one. Because now you have actual examples in front of your eyes, not just something you research online. You can actually, yeah.
And like I say, it wasn't like it wasn't like the leaders then didn't have anything to go off of with Katrina, because like I said, you had Hurricane Andrew, which was a Category 5 hurricane, just plowing right through about that same area 12 years earlier. Now, granted, it didn't break the levees like Katrina did, but you had a framework. It's like, okay, if a hurricane like this comes again, here's what we need to do, and they didn't do that. Like that was something that should have been settled in '93.
Yeah, and it's funny because Andrew actually flooded a lot more areas than Katrina did. Katrina's flooding was just localized in a very extreme way. But it's interesting that you say that because they actually did take what happened with Andrew, and they fixed a bunch of the pump systems and levee systems, not the big levee system, not the Mississippi River, but like in the local communities, it really gave them a blueprint on what the worst case scenario would be, and they did improve a lot. So what's ironic is that a lot of what flooded in Andrew didn't flood in Katrina.
Exactly. It's like, what they should have done was the entire section should have been completely staved off, because I mean, I think the storm surge from Andrew was like, I think that had the record until Katrina came around. I mean, it too had a pretty. It wasn't like the storm surge of Katrina, but it still had a significant storm surge to it. And yet I mean, in New Orleans, you knew this is possible. So what they should have done is have the entire levee system, for the reasons you stated, Amy, just completely revamped, and renovated, and made sure, okay, if we get a system like this again, let's not have this much flooding again.
Right. Well, okay, guys. I mean, we covered everything for the week that we needed to go over. So, and we definitely have hit our time. So, if you guys are good, I think we've got another one in the books.
Yep, and I can see that we've been live the entire time, so that's not going to be a problem. So,
okay. Awesome.
Everything looks good. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of here.
All right, guys. Enjoy your week, and we'll talk again about next week.
Sounds good.
Thank y'all. All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
I'm going to send the professor, who I think was watching for a little bit. All right.